All right, here we go. Chapter 2. Our first image that we're going to be looking at is the plaster statues that were found in Jordan, dating back to around 6,500 years, or actually more than that, sorry, more like 8,500 years ago. This is 6,500 BCE, and these figurines were made out of reeds and grass and plaster and seashells, and used painting for their eyes. And so see, these are some of the first figurines that were found dating back to that region. All right, here are your learning objectives. You should be able to explain that agriculture evolved independently in several regions of the world, and we'll be looking at those all the way from your more famous Mesopotamia, Egyptian River Valley, the Indus River Valley, and the Chinese River Valley. Also looking at some of the ones that aren't focused on as much, such as New Guinea and Mesoamerica, and some sub-Saharan regions in Africa as well. You should be able to trace the development of agriculture and its local variations, so that transition that occurs from Chapter 1 to Chapter 2, and of course our transition from Chapter 2 to Chapter 3 when we start getting into full-blown civilization. And you should be able to evaluate the social implications of the agricultural revolution, which will be a good transition into Chapter 3 when we get into civilization. All right, so in the past 2 centuries, there has been dramatic decline in the number of farmers worldwide. The United States is an extreme case. Only around 5% of Americans, many of them over 65 years old, were still on farms in the year 2000. There's been a great increase in the productivity of modern agriculture with technology and your breeding of certain seeds together. And so the development within food production has definitely changed in this past millennia. The modern retreat from the farm is a reversal of humanity's first turn in agriculture. And we're going to see that. Agriculture is going to be a huge theme all the way up into modern times. And of course, even today, is still the major economy of most civilizations. All right, here we go. The agricultural revolution in world history started about 12,000 years ago, and it is called the Neolithic Age, or the New Stone Age, or the Agricultural Revolution. Please note, if you hear the Agricultural Revolution, we're talking about the Neolithic Age. We will talk about some transformations later on in a second semester when we start getting in to what happens with agriculture and the scientific revolution and getting into the industrial revolution. And so that will be second semester information. Deliberate cultivation of plants and domestication of animals. And so this was briefly mentioned in our transition from Chapter 1 to Chapter 2. Transformed human life across the planet. And so obviously going from hunting and gathering to a sedentary society is a major change and will have implications within their culture, within their social hierarchies, even within their religion. And obviously as these places start to interact, even some of them becoming extinct, and of course eventually the fade from the hunting and gathering societies. Agriculture is the basis for almost all human development since, as I mentioned earlier, going all the way up to modern times, and really the United States being a rarity even today. And of course, agriculture brought about a new relationship between humans and other living things, nature, landscape, and of course, selective breeding among animals, and of course, even the change in some of our plants. All right, domestication of nature created new mutual dependence. Many domesticated plants and animals came to rely on humans. Humans lost gathering and hunting skills, and there was an intensification of living, getting more food and resources from much less land. So more food led to more people led to greater need for intensive exploitation of the land, exploitation of other people as well. We'll look at some of how the social hierarchies are affected by the agricultural revolution. Again, that point with number 1 right there, more food led to more people. If there's more food production, there's an increase in the amount of your population. So remember, there's a direct correlation there. All right, comparing agricultural beginnings. The agricultural revolution happened independently in several world regions. We're looking at the first three are your major areas, and then 4 through 7 are some of the more minor areas, but we are going to be able to look at all of those so you have a good comprehensive understanding of the transition within world history when we start discussing some of these other regions in the world later down in some of the other chapters that we're going to go with. So the next slide is a good map of where those are at. Okay, once again, make sure you guys study the maps. If you want to pause the video right here and look at it much more intensely, please do so. But once again, maps, guys, they are crucial to your understanding of what is going on in these chapters and what you're going to see on tests. Again, here's another map to go ahead and make sure that you look at. Again, if you want to pause the video here, but I'm going to keep moving forward for time's sake. And again, once again, I'm going to keep moving on for time's sake. If you want to pause it, look at different plants and animals that were herded and domesticated or were being farmed, please do so. All right, agricultural revolution coincided with the end of the last ice age. We're going to have things starting to warm up, which is going to increase certain types of plants being able to warm up. And of course, this is going to be increasing your migration that we talked about in chapter 1 as well. And here's another map. We're going to see the spread of agriculture, which will begin in Mesopotamia, that we'll see in a few slides, and we'll discuss that. All right, gathering and hunting peoples had already learned some ways to manage the natural world. Broad spectrum diet, development of sickles, baskets, and other tools to make use of wild grain in the Middle East. The Amazon had learned to cut back some of the undergrowth, which we talked about in chapter 1, where they had learned how to interact with the environment and cut back some of the land so the wildlife comes back. Australians had elaborate eel traps, so even some of our fishermen becoming well developed along the coastal lines or major river systems. All right, and women were probably the agricultural innovators because they were the ones that were constantly gathering as the men were hunting. And whether this is by accident or on purpose or very great observation or a combination of all three of those, it's just women were probably the ones who were involved in this, whether they were just eating a watermelon one day. Again, I'm just using a watermelon as an example, but I mean, if they were eating a watermelon one day and just spit the seeds down and then they come back in their next round within their cycle of their migration following the animals, and all of a sudden they see watermelons there and like, hey, wait a minute. Or whether they deliberately planted them. I mean, there is a concept. I mean, you're getting nuts and berries and fruits from these plants, and I mean, there's going to be direct observation right there. And so either way, more than likely women involved in that. And population growth is going to either start to occur because they're starting to settle down, or because there's a need for a food crisis that's occurring, because obviously you need more food for the more people you have. Either way, food production is starting to occur, and so people are starting to slowly settle down. And don't think that every single region was exactly the same. Due to climates, due to your local environment with the ground and what it can produce and what it can sustain, you're going to have different plants and different animals within different regions. Some people are going to domesticate one type of animal and are going to farm one type of crop, while another it's going to be the total opposite. We're going to see a lot more domestication of animals in the Eastern Hemisphere than we are in the Western Hemisphere, because the animals that are in the Western Hemisphere were larger and stronger and really weren't suited for domestication. Only a few hundred plant species have actually been domesticated when you start looking at the full spectrum of that. So if you're in any kind of science class, you've probably seen the extent of the species of plants that are out there. Only 14 large mammal species were domesticated. Again, some of them just not suitable for that based off of either just size, demeanor, or what they were actually even producing for you. All right, variations. The Fertile Crescent was the first to have a full agricultural revolution, so we're looking in the Mesopotamia region. a presence of large variety of plants and animals to be domesticated. This is sometimes hard for students to grasp because we see pictures of the Middle East today around that Euphrates and Tigris region, and we don't see the same thing that we're hearing, oh, all this fertile ground and everything. Guys, due to deforestation, due to over farming, due to erosion, due to droughts, due to massive amounts of war. I mean, that region has seen war since people settled there. And so the destruction that has occurred either by humans or by nature has left it at what we have today. Transition to agriculture triggered by a cold and dry spell between 1100 and 9500 BCE. And the transition apparently only took about 500 years. Now, you might think that's a long time, but when we're looking at world history and the time, that's really not that much. Much more societal sophistication. We're going to start looking at housing with mud bricks, monuments, shrines, more elaborate burials, and more sophisticated tools. So we're starting to get into some aspects of the building stages within civilization. All right, again, here's a map. If you need to pause it, look at it, go for it, but I'm going to keep on moving. At about the same time, domestication started in the Eastern Sahara, present-day Sudan. So we're kind of looking at that lower Egyptian region that is going to occur. The region was much more hospitable around 10,000 to 5,000 years ago. Domestication of cattle there about 1,000 years before the Middle East and India. And in Africa, animals were domesticated first. Elsewhere, plants were domesticated first. So Mesopotamia, we're going to credit them with agriculture first, domestication of animals with Africa first. Emergence of several widely scattered farming practices, just based off of different types of irrigation that are going to occur and any type of crop rotation, if that even really kind of existed. There was evidence of definitely over-farming the land in the very beginning stages. African agriculture was less productive than agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, but there are going to be some benefits to especially Egypt along the Nile. There is an exact timing of when the Nile will flood, giving you your very rich sediment soil that is going to occur versus some of the more sporadic floods that are going to happen in Mesopotamia or even in the Indus River Valley, where really there might be timing in the Indus River Valley because you know your monsoon season, but the flooding is just extreme. Flooding within the Mesopotamia region was unknown and sporadic, and the same thing in China as well, very sporadic when it flooded. All right, separate development of agriculture at several places in the Americas. So moving over to our Western Hemisphere. Absence of animals available for domestication, as I had mentioned earlier. Only cereal grain available was maize or corn, and I'm going to show you a picture in a second. You're going to see the size and the change from what their corn looked like to what we have today. The Americas are oriented north and south, so agricultural practices had to adapt to distinct climate zones to spread. And so here's that picture right here. You can see the size of a quarter compared to what your corn was, and then of course today seeing the size of the quarter compared to your ear of corn that you're looking at on the right hand side. All right, the globalization of agriculture. Agriculture spread in two ways: diffusion, gradual spread of techniques and perhaps plants and animals, but without much movement of human population. Colonization or migration of agricultural peoples. Often both processes were involved. And so even though these places develop individually, there'll be some small contact between them. But again, a lot of historians are kind of crediting to this all happening around that same 12,000 to 4,000 years ago due to climate change. All right, triumph and resistance. Language and culture spread with agriculture. So as people were settling down and as hunting and gathering societies started combining with other areas that were becoming more sedentary, languages are being combined and even some new languages starting to be formed and merged. You'll see a map here in a second with the Bantu language The Chinese language even having an effect on that Austronesian language that we mentioned that was spread throughout that Pacific region. So language is going to be a huge aspect. And our Indo-European languages probably started around that Turkish region are going to spread up into Europe and down into India as well. And here's a map, that Bantu language spreading throughout sub-Saharan Africa. All right, the globalization of agriculture took about 10,000 years. It did not spread beyond its core region in New Guinea. It did not spread in a number of other regions as well, either just due to natural boundaries or just how far those people were from other civilizations. Was resisted where the land was unsuitable for farming or where there was great natural abundance. And so some of your hunting and gathering societies still were going to continue on in their way of life. By the beginning of the Common Era, gathering and hunting peoples were a small minority of humankind, as we had mentioned in Chapter 1. All right, the culture of agriculture. The culture of agriculture. Agriculture led to a much greater population. Again, where there is more food production, there is a rise in population, which you can see 10,000 years ago, 6 million, 5,000 years ago, 50 million, beginning of the Common Era, 250 million people. And of course, now, obviously, China in the billions, India in the billions as well. Farming did not necessarily improve life for ordinary people. Remember in Chapter 1, we discussed how they spent much more time in leisure with their storytelling and their dancing and their songs. Whereas now people are having to work harder. You're needing to have more people to work the land, to farm the land and produce the food, especially as you get some social distinctions, the upper class needing to be fed. Health deteriorated in early agricultural societies, probably due to the fact that you're going to get diseases from animals that the people had not been picking up earlier. Also in hunting and gathering societies, one of two things are going to happen. You have a sick person and you leave them behind, or you're looking at 25 to 50 people being affected, and either they all die out or some of them die out, but it's not affecting a large population. But now that you have large communities reaching several hundred to several thousand, eventually we'll see in civilization reaching 10,000 plus, even getting up to 1 million people in some of these early cities within China. There would be epidemics with these diseases, wiping out huge parts of population. New vulnerability to famine because of the dependence on a small number of plants or animals. New constraints on human communities as well, based off of that climate and environment that you're living in and what the people have developed as far as technology. So all agricultural people settled in permanent villages. We can look at Banpo in China, which was settled around 7,000 years. We'll also look at some areas in Turkey with Catalahuk, and which, again, I brutally say these things wrong, so I do not mean to offend anybody or somebody with a higher intelligence here who can pronounce things much better than me. I apologize for any words from here on out. For the rest of the chapters, I will butcher some names of people, places, cities, and so I highly apologize for that. I've worked on it. I go and I try to memorize them in your dictionary online when you can just hit the little volume key and listen to it, but still somehow it always comes out wrong when I go to give the lecture. So I apologize. But we'll see pots, textiles, metallurgy. Some of the most highly advanced societies are actually going to be China and their development of technology, which will be a common theme for a very long time in history. All right, here's your horizontal and vertical organization of societies, which we're going to be getting into some of the social aspects with elites and bureaucrats and commoners and what that is all going to entail. All right, secondary products revolution started around or circa 4000 BCE. A new set of technological changes, as I just mentioned, China. Very sophisticated, new uses for domesticated animals, including milking, riding, hitching to plows and carts. We'll see that early on in China. only available in the Eastern Hemisphere. That has to do with the fact of the animals that were domesticated, as mentioned previously. Deliberate alterations of the natural ecosystem, removal of ground cover, irrigation, grazing. Obviously, some of this is going to be some struggles with flooding that you're going to have in Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, which was actually pretty fertile for a long time. The Chinese definitely having to deal with some of their sporadic flooding during their rainy seasons that they're going to occur. And so some of that natural, some of that due to the overfarming. Evidence of soil erosion and deforestation in the Middle East, as I had mentioned earlier. All right, social variations in the age of agriculture. Pastoral societies, some regions relied much more heavily on animals because of farming was difficult or impossible there, and so you'll have your herding societies. Pastoral nomads emerged in Central Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, the Sahara Desert, parts of Eastern and Southern Africa. Guys, if you can't mentally picture those locations right now, please pause this video, go to a map that's either in this PowerPoint video or online on my website or in the book, because it's important that you can kind of mentally picture Central Asia in your head. You know what the Arabian Peninsula looks like. It is very vital because it's going to help you on the AP exam. Relied on different animals in different regions, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, due to climate, due to where those animals had started to be domesticated. Horses were domesticated around 4000 BCE, and they were around that Central Asia steppes region, kind of getting into the Middle East and the southern parts of the Russian region. Domesticated camels allowed human life in the inner Asian, Arabian, and Saharan deserts. We'll see the Sahara Desert come much after Arabian that will spread over there and help increase their trade. We'll learn about that in a couple chapters. No pastoral societies emerged in the Americas, again, due to the lack of certain types of animals. All right, agricultural village societies. Most characteristics form of early agricultural societies like Banpo or Jericho. Maintenance of equality and freedom. No kings, chiefs, bureaucrats, or aristocrats. Kalahuk in southern Turkey had a population with several thousand. Dead were buried under the houses. Some people think that has to do with ancestral worship and keeping families close. Some people think it was just an easier way as they continue to build houses on top of each other, and it kind of be their burial spot. That helped financially as well. No streets. People moved around on the rooftops. You can kind of think of some of your more modern movies that you have with the new Bourne movie and the rooftop scene there, or some of your James Bond movies, or any of those movies that you guys can think of where you're in some of the countries where everything is so tight, smaller streets, people are jumping on the rooftops, getting across. But you really didn't have streets here. It was just buildings connected to buildings, and people would move along the rooftops. No indication of male or female dominance. Village-based agricultural societies were usually organized by kinship groups or a lineage that was occurring, performed the function of the governments. And so we can see this in Tiv of central Nigeria, organized nearly 1 million people this way in the late 19th century. Also, some people credit this to being some types of your caste system that might help with this process that you'll see like in the Indus River Valley with the Harappan area, or Mojandiro. Again, I brutally pronounce things wrong. Sorry, but some of those having some evidence of your social arrangements that way. All right, and here's your typical Banpo dwelling. Here's a good chart that you guys can look at. Again, I'm going to keep moving on to save time, but you guys can look at the development of these cities, regions, political structure, and social development. This is an image of Catalahuk, which is down in your Indus River Valley. Sorry. That's Harappan, which is a couple slides later. This is in Turkey. Sorry, this is in the northern part of Turkey today. And here is your structure that you're having with your buildings. Here's some of the ruins that you're going to have in the Euphrates River area. So you can see some of their housing. This is over in the Americas. All right, sometimes modest and social economic inequality developed. Elders could win privileges, control of female reproductive powers as well, and so that way they had a more control over that society. We'll see chiefdoms. Chiefs, unlike kings, usually rely on generosity, ritual, status, or charisma to govern, not force. Kings using a little bit more force there with coercion and having a strong military presence. Chiefdoms emerged in Mesopotamia sometime around 6000 BCE. Anthropologists have studied recent chiefdoms in the Pacific Islands. Chiefdoms such as the Cahokia, again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, emerged in North America. That was the cartoon image that I showed you. If you missed that, you can go back a few slides and look at it. Distinction between elite and commoners was first established. All right, and that is going to end our slides now.